The first type of price control we're going to talk about are price ceilings. And so we're going to start our discussion of price ceilings by drawing the market for apartments. Okay? So here we have our axes. Here is going to be the rental price. Measured in dollars per month. And here we're going to have the quantity, the number of apartments. And we're going to write in our supply and our demand curve. So we're going to have our normal upward sloping supply. And we're going to have our normal downward sloping demand. Oops. And we know that in the absence of any government intervention, the market will tend toward the equilibrium. And we'll say that this equilibrium occurs at a point where 200 apartments are being rented, and the monthly rental price is $500. All right? So this is our market. This is a market operating under no government intervention. And now we're going to see what happens when we impose a price ceiling. So we're going to think about two cases. The first case is where the price ceiling is above the equilibrium price. Now, in that case, when the price ceiling is above equilibrium price, so suppose the price ceiling is $600. So now the government comes along and says, you can't charge a price for an apartment that is greater than $600. So this is our price ceiling. In this case, so remember, a price ceiling is a legal maximum on the price of good or service. In this case, the government is saying a market cannot charge any more than $600. But this market by itself will choose to charge less. The market will adjust to set the price equal to $500. So in this case, the price ceiling has no effect. The price ceiling is said to be non-binding. Since it has no effect on the market. So a price ceiling above the market price will not affect market outcomes at all. Now, let's think about the second case where the price ceiling is below the market price. So here's our market again. And this is a case where the price ceiling is below the market price. So let's say we have a price ceiling of $300. So we know what the market wants to charge for these apartments. Now the government is coming along and saying you can't charge more than $300 for this apartment. So here's our price ceiling. And in this case, the price ceiling will have an effect. The market wants to charge $500. The market is being forced to charge $300. And so that's going to have two effects. There's a supply effect and a demand effect. On the supply side, sellers, seeing that the apartments are $300, the law of supply will say, everything else being the same, sellers will supply fewer apartments. And so quantity supplied will fall. The other effect is a demand effect. As the price of a good falls, all else equal, people want to buy more of it. So there'll be an increase in demand, or rather in the quantity demanded of apartments. So now, under this price ceiling, there are 300 units being demanded and only 100 units being supplied, leading to a shortage of 200 apartments. And that's the effect of a price ceiling. So, in this case, let me jot down some notes. The equilibrium price $500 is now illegal. They can't charge that price. So the ceiling, in this case, is binding. And the result is that quantity supplied falls, quantity demanded rises, and there's now a shortage. So, why does that matter? So there's a few things. So first of all, the market is not selling as much as it could. But it also has to do with how these goods are rationed in the face of a shortage. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So, with a shortage, sellers must ration the goods among buyers. In other words, I have more people wanting to buy my product than I have products available to sell. So sellers have to decide who gets the good. So some mechanisms. Long lines. So people have to wait online for the good. Discrimination. Based on sellers' biases. So maybe the seller will only sell to certain groups. So, and these mechanisms, these rationing mechanisms, can often be unfair and can also be inefficient. So the goods don't go to the people who want it the most. It goes based on who was first in line, or who the seller decides to sell to. By contrast, when prices are not controlled, the rationing mechanism is efficient. So the people who are willing to pay the most for the good are the ones who get it, and they also tend to be more fair because it tends to be impersonal. Now, we've seen rationing happen during the pandemic, and the example that really comes to mind is the shortages of toilet paper that occurred at the beginning of the lockdown. And what people were doing, because there was this shortage of toilet paper, what stores ended up doing was limiting the number of items people could buy, which is a reasonably fair way of doing it. But if someone is willing to pay a lot to buy a lot of toilet paper, the market should say, well, that's okay. So we'll talk more about that in a separate set of notes. But that's what a price ceiling is.